move the discussion and possible action on approving a stepped sewer rate increase to slot 3. Move that up so that we can have Eller's report before some of these other items. All right, I'll just assume it's good. So item number 1 on our agenda is to approve the minutes of the May 5th, 2020 meeting. Do I have a motion? A motion from Jean, second from Herbst. Is there any discussion?
I had a question, Scott, on the plantings around Reservoir, on Reservoir Hill around the outlet pipe. I haven't seen anything yet.
I haven't either, and I haven't followed up on it. Jim, I can check on it and get back to you.
This is the seasoned plant.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote? All right, all those in favor of approving the minutes can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. Moving on to item number 2, the director's report on utility operations. Pass the mic.
So there's a number of items for water and a few for sewer, so I entertain any questions Dave, Scott, or I could answer.
Eric, I once again saw the hydrant flushing going on without any demarcation on the street. This was at 17th Avenue and Stewart, right across from Walgreens there.
Okay.
And the water was crossing both lanes, as well as the bike lane there, gushing across the street. Cars were driving through it, but water was splashing up on their windshields, and they were going quite rapidly through that stream. Again, I didn't notice any signage saying, be careful flushing ahead. And I know it doesn't last very long, but
Right.
I'm worried that somebody's going to swerve or stop or create a traffic jam.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think Scott and the operations, we could probably work with streets and maybe get some signs up.
Yeah, we followed up on this because you had the same concern last year, Jim, and the guys do have the signs on the trucks, and they were placing them out on the heavily traveled streets, but maybe it got missed. I can follow up with them, and I can work with DPW to gain some.
Yeah, I hate to have an accident and have that come before the board because we didn't do something right.
Correct.
Mr. Robinson.
I have a question relative to the scope of services for infiltration study. Is it a policy for us to rely on the contractors, the engineer's contract, or does the city have a template for contracts going forward? And if they don't, I would suggest we look at it. Some of the exclusions are longer than the terms of services, and I think it's always better for the city and the utility to develop their own contract with standard insurance, indemnification, and other language going forward than relying upon, in this case, it's a significant contract, and we're basically defaulting to their contract. What's the policy?
Yeah, so currently the city has been working on for all of our RFPs, for the different departments, because in the past we haven't. We have relied on, for professional services anyway, construction, we have our own contracts established and things, or a lot of this language was pulled out of EJCDC. That's really the direction that we're moving, but we don't have one in place yet. I know the attorney sent one out, and so we're working towards that. That is a good point, Jim, because when we do send out the RFPs, it would be nice to have the contract with that. It just kind of makes it easier, and I think it lessens the burden of reviewing all kinds of different contracts, yeah. We're not there yet, but we are working on it, yeah.
I know the DNR had a standard professional service contract that you want to look at, and then you've got all your
Right.
your insurances, your protections. Contracts are written to protect
Right.
the owner or the
Right.
purchaser as well. And
Yeah.
I think this one, I'm just in reviewing it, I think
Yeah.
we'd be better served by having our own contracts.
Yeah, so we kind of have a mix, of our construction contracts, which I've talked with legal about, and then also the EJCDC, which are standard in the industry for all professional services as well as construction. So hopefully we'll have something put together this year that can be used actually citywide. Yeah.
Mr. Jean.
The status of the blower that went down, Can you overview that? And I have a question.
We
The blower?
met with Mike Gerbitz this morning, or unless you want to take that, Mike? And we considered options. The blower is expensive, and there's a long lead time to get one put in and in place and fired up. And so what we're exploring as our number one option is to get the new blowers in place, one of them at least as soon as possible. And then for an emergency, we're looking at lagoon-type floating blowers that could maybe be installed on shorter notice. We're fine with two, but if we lose another one, then we'll have to step into emergency mode and look at, we kind of have an option for that.
I guess that was my question. Do you typically use one, or do you use two?
To typically use one when it's hot, and this time of year, we might need a second one to to optimize the deal. And then the third, it's designed so could have one down for maintenance and still be able to handle our normal flows. If we were down to one blower, we'd be okay, we'd still be treating, we probably wouldn't have a problem with our permit. But if that happens, then we'll be looking at something else to have on, to cover that emergency.
That sounds like a good plan, because I assumed you were typically only using one, so you still had a
Yep.
backup. So accelerating the purchase or the delivery of one unit might make a lot of sense.
Instead of what we would pay for rental would be a substantial amount of the cost for buying that blower when we buy it, so.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions? Okay, we'll move on to, again, we moved number 5 up, discussion and possible action on approving a stepped sewer rate increase. Do you want to kick us off?
Sure, I'll kick us off. We have Ellers on the line, too. I had put some information in the packet in the form of a memo, along with, there's a couple attachments, and then a draft resolution was also put together for the sewer rates that are proposed. They're a little bit different than what the rate study actually showed, which came from Ellers. Our recommendation is to follow Ellers with the rate study. And so those numbers, before they go to council on resolution, would be amended accordingly. But Ellers is also on the line for a short presentation with regards to the sewer rates as well as the borrowing. I don't know if you want to see if anybody has any questions.
Sure.
or-
Are there any, okay, we can probably just start with Brian from Ellers, kind of kicking us off, unless there are questions off the bat. Okay. Brian, if you want to lead us into your presentation, we have it in front of us.
Sounds good. Do I need to share the presentation, or do they have that?
Oh, we do have it, but you could share it for people who might be watching this later.
Yep.
Thanks.
That'd be-
Great, thanks, we see it.
Are you guys able to see the? okay.
Yep, thank you.
Sounds great. Well, thank you, everyone, for having me here today. This is going to be a much briefer overview than the rate study reports that were provided. Those are about 135 pages in total, and I figured instead of going page by page, we'd save some time with a good old classic PowerPoint. So with that said, I'm going to first talk about water and what was done, and then sewer to follow water. And for both of these, we're going to kind of go in the funding component in what was needed to finance the respective treatment facilities. And then we're going to talk about the rate adjustments that were done under our engagement. And then we're going to talk about future planning. That was one of the primary reasons for conducting the study was to not only look at how do we get these treatment facilities funded, how do we close on the DNR loans, but how do we prepare for the additional capital improvements that we plan to make, and how do our rates look outside of that as well. So that's how we're going to kind of attack. With that said, the drinking water treatment facility funding mechanism is a Safe Drinking Water Fund loan, and that's underwritten by the state of Wisconsin through the Department of Administration and the Department of Natural Resources. So that term and rate on the loan is 20 years at 1.76%. That is a fixed rate that is constant throughout the maturity of the loan. And with that said, it should be noted as well that it is not callable or prepayable at any time. That's kind of one of the cons, if you will, from the state, but you do get a much lower interest rate in that market rate debt. If you were to go for public bid right now, it would be somewhere close to 3%, maybe just under 3%, given market conditions this week. So with that said, you're getting a great interest rate, 20-year loan, and then an additional benefit is that it works similar to a construction or draw loan, whereas you're paying interest on the disbursements that you're making as you go through construction, and then upon substantial completion, which is a review by the Department of Natural Resources, the first May 1st that comes after substantial completion is when you'll start paying principal. So that's really a big component when you consider the construction timeline here, specifically for the drinking water facility, substantial until August 2022. So therefore, principal wouldn't start until May 1st, 2023. Then it's also important to note that the security on this loan is the water revenues from your water facility. And that's important because when the state is looking to underwrite the loan, the Department of Administration does a financial review, and they are looking to see, okay, what sort of revenues, less expenses, does the system generate in order to pay for debt? And I've kind of gone through this in previous exercises with the commission early in November, and then again in your last meeting. But that said, they want to see revenues available for service at 1.25 times your annual debt payment. So it's important to note the water fund has existing debt service in the 2017 and 2019 water revenue bonds. And with that said, so you take the principal and interest from each of those bonds and add it on top of the prospective new bonds, and the DOA says, all right, you need to have rates so that you can prove that you have 1.25 times that amount. So I'll get into it shortly. It kind of shows that here on the next couple slides. But that said, these rates were insufficient at the time of loan closing. So that said, we just needed a rate adjustment. So in order to do that, apologize, bouncy. The rate adjustment in the water utility, important to note that you're in a regulated environment. We've kind of gone through, the PSC rate case, and therefore, in order to close on the loan, you had to go through this rate case, and we had to get rates to get to that coverage. Well, it should be noted too that the PSC doesn't always let you grab rates beyond 1 year from the time that you're applying for a rate adjustment. So with that said, the PSC, and this can be seen in my February 25th memo on how the PSC looks at developing rates and what was allowed, but essentially they allowed for 2 steps in the initial plan, and that is you have a 26% rate increase to current rate revenues, so that's all around rate revenues, and based on what was applied for at the rate revenues at that time or 2018 results. And so they allowed a 26% increase to that, and then they go through a cost of service study and a rate design to develop rates to the specific customer classes. And once again, this was seen in the February memo, but just as a reminder, they do that because various customer classes use the system differently. What that means is your water system is designed to handle max hour and max day capabilities, whereas your residences, for example, will really spike max hour and max day differently than other customer classes, just as an example. So they're using water, in the morning and at night, typically before and after they go off to work and school. So just understanding that, it's not just a general rate increase that the PSC does. They do look at it on a customer class basis. So the other important thing to note is that the PSC did just authorize this two-step rate increase. However, it did not include the last components of the construction. So what that means is, I kind of explained the construction timeline in talking about the funding, in that, you're looking to have some construction 2020, 2021, and 2022. Well, the PSC only allowed for what they labeled as a construction work in progress adder, and they would look to see that you go in for a rate case after once you're coming into 2022 to grab those last assets for the drinking water treatment facility. So that said, you could come in for a 2021 in the middle of calendar year 2021 for a test year 2022 rate case with the PSC, and have rates in effect before that last substantial completion. And truly, this is what's going to be needed in order to continue on. You were able to close on the loan, but you're going to continually prove 1.25 coverage as you move forward. You are going to need that additional rate increase. And the reason being is because you're not only doing this treatment facility, you do have other capital projects that you're tackling as you move into the future, and those are built into this plan. So the prospective third step that you're seeing in the, on the chart to the right here, we have it around 10%. That's projected for now, and the reason for that is because, the PSC looks at those assets in the ground and says, okay, you need a return of, typically it's around 5%. You need a return on your assets that are in the ground of 5%. And so we're projecting forward based on what assets you'll have in service at that place. That's dependent upon the drinking water treatment facility, certainly, but it's also dependent on your other capital, the street projects, the mains, things you do moving forward. So right now we have that projected around 10%. And, we would suspect to, keep you updated as if we get engaged for the next rate study or, continuation of long-range planning. Certainly we can update these projections as we go along. So what does that future planning look like? The two main charts, we have several tables in the water rate study in section 3 of that study. The two main charts to kind of look at is all-in debt coverage, and what that's saying is not only looking at debt that's secured by the revenues of the system, but you're looking at your other debt obligations. The water may be responsible for some of the general obligation debt of the city, which it is. And then in addition to that, the water actually has an outstanding advance from the sewer utility that it's repaying to the sewer utility. So that's including all of that debt. In addition to that, this chart not only nets out your cash expenses in the operating and maintenance, as the DOA financial review does, but it also includes your pilot payments. So it should be noted the DOA financial review does not include that pilot payment, which is a benefit to the utility. Otherwise, the rates may have needed to be higher at that time of closing. But that said, if you include the pilot payment as well, that's another additional expense that, lowers your revenues available for debt service. So that said, this is important, this all-in debt coverage, because underwriters will be looking at this as you go out for future debt issuance. In addition to that, it should be noted that you are a rated utility with Moody's, and this is what the rating agencies actually look at. They don't just look at your flat revenue debt coverage, they'll look at this all-in debt coverage because it gives a bigger and better picture of the financial health, and rates are set a sufficient manner. So you'll note here, just looking at this chart, revenues available for debt are just under the minimum recommended. That the main reason for that is actually that advanced sewer utility. So what we've shown for the need for future rate increases, that you'll see on a slide at the end of this presentation for the water fund, we've actually set at a level that you'll be able to pay those advances, but truly, are we looking to, have rates set 25% of that, annual advance payment? I would say you can make an argument that no, you don't need to, in effect, punish ratepayers on that specific amount. So you'll see this just below the minimum recommended available revenues for debt service. But that was the mentality looking forward. And certainly, this is a 10-year outlook. When we're looking at operating and maintenance expenses, that fluctuates more than just a 3% inflationary assumption, which is what we've used. You have infrequent and highly expensive maintenance items that ebb and flow and are highly volatile. So that said, it's kind of taking the approach of, all right, let's look at what it might look like and what that looks like for a user. So that's what we're doing here with that. And then at the bottom, we show a reserves chart that just looks at, okay, what's a target reserve level? And this target reserve level, albeit is Eller's recommendation, so that's 6 months of operating expenses, including depreciation and 100% of your debt service. So it's higher than the rating agencies by a little bit, and then it's also higher than what the PSC would hold you to. So if you look at the water rate study, there's benchmarking analysis tables in both the historical and the future looking that would kind of bear out all of those cash reserve targets. It's important to note the PSC, you're limited as to how you can control rates. So this is actually pretty typical, to see reserves, slightly below our 6-month mark, specifically on the regulated entity. For the sewer, wastewater treatment facility, you're using a clean water fund loan, similar underwriting situation here through the state. You have a term of 30 years, a little bit higher interest rate at the 1.87 because it's out for 30 years. Similar payment structure. It's not callable at any time. There's, you're not allowed to make any prepayments or pay principal in any accelerated manner. And then your security here is the sewer revenues. The similar DOA financial review was done. You're looking at the 1.25 coverage again, looking at that annual debt service payment. They have the sewer fund has similar outstanding revenue bonds in 2017 and 2019 outstanding issues. And then similarly here, we were insufficient at the time of closing and needed a rate adjustment. So we have a 3-step process for this. The DOA kind of slices it up and says, you'll see in the executive summary in our sewer rate study, the DOA says, all right, this is the total increase you're going to need by the time that your principal payments start. So the difference here is that, the projected substantial completion is a little bit later at January 2023. However, those principal payments then start actually at the same time right now as projected as the water, safe drinking water fund. And so that would be May 1st of 2023. So that said, you had some time to implement these rates. So in talking it over with city staff and the Department of Administration, we kind of landed upon a 3-step increase to get us there. And that'll kind of, spread the time in terms of when, your users will feel the rating. So here is a 63% total increase that was needed. We decided to go with a 22, and a 19% increase. When it comes to the sewer system, a little less fluctuating on that max hour, max day, but more or less, there are some cost differences in terms of how fixed costs and variable costs are viewed. So you'll you'll see some differentiation between the two, excuse me, between the user classes and how we set up those initial rates in our rate study. So that was what Eric was speaking to in terms of the difference between what was the city originally drafted in their rate resolution and then what we proposed. We were using our cost of service study and our rate design so that actually residential users are getting a 22% impact on their rates. And then, the other varying classes have other differing levels within that. And that can be seen within the sewer rate study, section 2. So that said, the city does need to pass this resolution next week. That would be June 9th in order to close on the financial assistance agreement. And that actually needs to be done, the agenda item before you approve the financial assistance agreement for the DOA. Similarly, here we're looking at that all-in coverage when we look at future planning. So not only are we looking at the increases that would be taken on by the resolution, but our sewer rate study recommends increases beyond that for a 10-year period. The main one being another 18% increase in 2022. And so you go 22% this year, 22% next year, 19% 2021, or excuse me, 2022, and then an 18% 2023, excuse me. So we really have, in order to execute all of the future capital that we've been furnished and the, inflationary increases to operating and maintenance expense, that's what we've projected. Certainly at that time, it's going to be, efficient and valuable to reevaluate what that increase might actually be. Right now, that's a projection looking 4 years into the future. You may not draw the complete amount on those loans as it's projected. I think that was in one of Eric's supplements to this agenda item, whereas the DNR is requesting that you do certain contingencies and you may not actually draw that full amount. So these are all shown, all the future planning is assuming the full amount on the draw, and that reason being is because that's what the DOA actually requires for their financial review. So that said, the bottom right, you'll see reserves. You're actually able to, because this loan is a much higher annual debt service payment in that, we're showing a $90 million loan on top of the additional existing debt that you have in the 2017 and 2019 revenue bonds. It'll stand to reason that you have to prove 125% coverage annually, so your revenues have to generate 25% above the debt service, net of all expenses. You're going to start to build some cash. So the higher the loan amounts, the more cash you're building. So actually, for the sewer fund, that actually resulted in the ability, we're projecting your ability to use cash to offset some future planned debt issuances. So in the capital improvement plan that we were furnished, the city identified certain projects, that may have longer useful lives, or just in general that they wanted to debt fund. So we've shown those, but we're also showing that starting in 2023, when the main majority of this loan kicks in, you're going to start generating some excess cash here that you're going to be able to pay for future capital with. So that can be seen in section 3 of the sewer rate study in more detail, but quite simply here, you're above your target revenue amount, or excuse me, cash balance. The most important, what does this mean for our residents? So this is shown with not only what the DOA is requiring to close on the loans, but the additional increases as I've identified earlier in the presentation, both for water and for sewer, in order to fund all your future financial obligation. So that said, certainly subject to change, but this is just kind of a quick view at what that might look like. So the water is on the left side, and with all the future increases projected beyond the 2022 rate case, we're showing that simplified rate cases more or less to counteract the assumed inflationary adjustments to operating and maintenance in the future. You may want to annually look at, all right, should we do a simplified rate case or biannually? Here we're kind of doing biannually as required. And then for sewer, we're looking at, like I said, the last, in 2023, doing that 18% rate increase. And, we're really going to say it's going to be important to evaluate your rates at that time, because that's when the Clean Water Fund loan principal and interest will come online May 1st of 2023. And then to that point, you may have additional funding for capital improvements that have happened in the interim time. So you're going to, in order to secure those funds, you're going to have to prove 1.25 coverage as well. So that said, that's our long-range plan with, only 3% kind of inflationary adjustments beyond that. Unbeknownst to any other large capital projects, as you can see, the furnished CIP ended in 2024. So we haven't included any assumptions beyond what the utility may be able to cash finance moving forward. So that said, the total change to the quarterly bill, including water and sewer here in this 10-year plan, is $104.45, the majority of which being, the first several years in order to close on these large treatment facility projects. So that being said, this chart plays into the next chart, and in addition to the conversations that we've been having in terms of how do we, maybe lower the burden on our residential users? Can we go to the PSC with some prospective rate changes that we talked about in the last meeting for the future rate case? So that being said, I wanted to provide this utility bill affordability analysis. What this is the Environmental Finance Center network. That's what EFCN stands for. Provides some, tools to look at affordability, and we've, used their tool here to kind of show how much, various income classes are paying on the water and sewer bills as a ratio of their total income. So what you'll see here in the blue is the percentage of the population that lands in each of these income buckets. This information was gathered from the U.S. Census Bureau's American Community Survey, and to be quite honest, they changed their website, so the percentage of population numbers are actually kind of a net average between the state and Marathon County, because Wausau's weren't coming up as clean as those. And so I'm thinking that as we move into the future with the 2020 census, we're probably going to get some better data on this anyway. But the more important number to look at, and bars here are these orange or tan bars. Looking at this is the percent of the total income that you're paying on the 5-year average for this plan. So if you go back to this chart and you're looking at, we look at the 5-year average because these are the more known increases that are needed to close on these loans. So we take this, these quarterly bills, times it by 4 to get your annual amount, and we'll take the 5-year average of that. So 2020 through 2024 came out to $720.54 annual, that the average resident will have to pay at the usage amounts depicted in the previous chart. So that said, you take 720, divided by the 10,000 annual income, and they're paying 7.21%. You go down the line and do the same thing. The main thing that this chart points out is, probably bearing out some of the suspicions that were raised by the various commissioners, and that, is there something we can do to adjust these rates? And to that point, I would say, the second you raise it, we ran this, this kind of chart, and we're thinking when you go in for the next rate case, to gather the last assets of the treatment facility, As we've talked about, we can talk to the PSC about adjusting the residential and commercial rates, not only in what we talked about last time in running our own cost of service study in order to kind of reduce that burden for the residents. But in addition to that, what I've suggested to city staff is we evaluate the use of what's called a lifeline rate. What this is in the residential portion of the water tariff, you'll notice you're charged a flat, currently, what is it, $2.29? Yeah, $2.29 for usage. So every 100 cubic feet, you pay $2.29. What a lifeline rate will do is say, the majority of these lower income households are actually probably one resident living there using low amounts of water on a very fixed income. So generally you try to say, all right, if we're using gallons, the last lifeline rate that we established for a utility, we said 0 to 2,000 gallons is actually going to be at $2 instead of $2.29. And I'm just kind of throwing out the general idea behind it, but you lower the first rate in order to protect these lower income customers from rate increases moving forward, and maybe level these percentages out as you move forward. Once you establish that, then that carries forward for your future rate increases. In addition to that, we didn't recommend that for the sewer side. You're probably thinking, wait a second, sewer is unregulated. But in looking that, we were just kind of asked these questions, just trying to push this forward in order to close on the loan. We thought not only prudent to get this information as complete and correct for the Department of Administration, but hold off on changing the sewer rates and maybe using a similar lifeline rate there that would mimic what the PSCs would be. The reason you want to wait on that as well is because for ease of administration, obviously when you're establishing rates, it can be all great to figure out, all right, how do we pay for all of our financial obligations, but you also have billing clerks that are trying to figure out how to set up the billing systems in order to do this. If you can get the PSC on board with a lifeline rate, and the city is wanting to move forward with that, then you can do it both at once and administer those rates, both on a similar change schedule so that your billing system can handle that when you're administering those bills. So that would be our recommendation. It's not necessarily mentioned in our sewer rate study as we weren't really engaged to do this kind of work, but given that it came up at the latter portion here in concluding our rate study, we thought, if the next time around, if you want us to kind of walk through that with the PSC as we have done in other communities, you can look to Whitewater's tariff where we implemented the lifeline rates specifically. My colleague John Cameron did that for them in not their last rate case, but the previous one. They have a 0 to 2,000 gallon rate that's lower than the rest of their tiers for the residential users. So that's what we're recommending. It's not in the sewer rate study because we weren't really engaged to do it, but this is what we'd say based on our conversation. I know that's a lot to take in, so I'll kind of let that digest a little bit and take any questions that you may have or additional details as Eric would like me to go into.
Sure. Are there any questions? Yeah. Mr. Jean.
Can you help me? When we had our last water rate increase, I noticed in the PSC report for 19 that our net revenue went up by 1.2 million, so it must have been in 18?
I guess I'm not, what are you reflecting back to 2018?
Well, in 19, our net revenue went up by 1.2, so we must have had a fairly large water rate in 18 that was implemented, or early 19, I can't remember, so I'm just curious.
You did have I know you went through a simplified rate case in, I believe it was late 2018.
I don't think that would generate 1.2 million.
I think I saw our finance director nodding her head.
Yeah, I think it was, out in the West Business Campus, the TID paid for the water and sewer utility out there, you know?
Oh,
So that
that's
was-
why the extra revenue.
Yes.
Oh.
So that showed up.
All right.
In 19.
But
Yep.
I thought we had a rate increase. I saw 1.2 million. I said, and I knew it only talked about the simplified rate cases, so I was kind of curious. I know I have a question on the sewer side. The draft ordinance that we have, it reflects 3 increments. Does that have to be part of the ordinance? Or are some council members going to have issues with that to come through it that way? I'm okay with it, but it's set by time, so it won't go into play until that time is reached, and then it basically goes into place. From the state standpoint, is that mandatory to be written in that format of the ordinance?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, with the DOA. With the DOA, right, Brian?
Yes, that is required by the DOA.
Yep.
So, well, I should say, what's required by the DOA is you do an increase. So, let me just put this for, show you what's, are you able to see this chart in blue?
Yes.
Okay. So what's required by the DOA specifically is an amount increase in order to pay interest up until substantial completion. So you're going to be asking for disbursements from that of funds in order to pay for the construction of the wastewater facility as you go along. And you're going to pay interest on that as you ask for disbursements. What they've projected for that amount is 13%, so this was kind of what they minimally required, and then a 50%, excuse me, this should say 6%, but a 13% and a 50% in order to close on the loan. What is required for the Clean Water Fund loan rate resolution as decided by the city in our conversations between us, the city staff, and the DOA is we have to get to that same amount, but essentially do this in a step manner in order to kind of separate this out. So what's actually required is the 13 and the 50. What was decided upon was 22, 22, and so it is required, the timing of it, and all 3 would be required.
Mr. Force.
The lifeline rate that you referred to, when would be the opportunity to perhaps implement that? I'm not clear on the timing.
Brian, I'm not sure if you can hear the question, but the question was about the lifeline rate. When would we be able to implement that?
Right, so the next time you go in for a conventional rate case, which we are showing us, you go in 2021 for a 2022 test year application. So that would be in the summer of 21. Those are made available by the PSC. You have to ask for those rate changes within the context of a conventional rate case. And so we would do that at that time if we were engaged to complete the application to the city.
Thank you. Mr. Robinson.
So how set are we on the 22, 22, and 19? My concern is affordability and the impact to low-income people, and, you've got a 26% water, 22% sewer in year 1, in the the DOA recommendation was 13 in year 1 and 50 in year 3. What happens if we smooth out those to try to lower the impact in year 1, year 2, year 3? What does that do to our bonding and our other requirements? So if we
I
were
think
closer
good.
to, go ahead.
On the sewer, you can change it to really any which way you would so choose to. What we would recommend is doing anything that's generally higher to lower. And the reason being for that is for cash flow purposes, because you're going to be it's not going to be simply O&M that's increasing by, 3% or 5%. There's going to be some fluctuations, higher or lower. So actually, we recommend kind of doing higher earlier for the sewer, because you're trying to get, you're climbing this mountain here. You're trying to get to the certain point where you're at 125 coverage. And the sooner you do the increase, the better, because then you can get a better picture of what's finally needed. So at the end of this, you may say, all right, we don't actually need the full 19%. We might need a little bit less if we don't draw on the full amount of the loan. But the problem is if you're on the opposite side of the spectrum and you're like, well, let's go with a 10, a 15, and then a 30, or whatever it may be. If all of a sudden you realize, oh geez, we don't need a 30 because we've had additional capital that's come on beyond what was given to Ellers at 3 years ago, now we need a 50% increase. So that's kind of why we generally recommend do the higher earlier for what's needed. You kind of set yourself up in a better position moving forward, and can back off, or you'd be more set up to back off if you're able to on the back end. But this is what the full amount is what's needed to close on the loan. So we expect the number that would actually decrease would be this.
And a follow-up question, do you have any empirical data relative to what rate increases due to utilization, and how that might impact volume and therefore revenue if we go with these increases?
We don't have any data that correlation would show causation. So that end.
We don't have it because we haven't looked for it, or it doesn't exist, or there's been no study of increased rates and utilization?
Not for the state of Wisconsin, no, to my knowledge.
John, over the years, when we did have significant rate increases, there was kind of a depressed usage, but within 6 months or even not much longer than that, it typically was back to normal. I know when I came to the city of Wausau, I had to raise sewer rates 45%. That wasn't fun, but it quickly was not an issue. And I want to remind everybody that we just, Eric and I were talking about it, that we just implemented a 20% in early 19. And I asked if there was any complaints, and he said, no, there was virtually none. That doesn't mean we shouldn't try to make this affordable for those that don't have much of an income. I don't have a problem with that. But I think I understand what Brian is saying, is we don't want to make it easy and then find out we're way behind towards year 3 or 2, whatever it might be, as far as getting that 1.25 coverage and addressing other potential capital projects.
Is there any more discussion?
Well, on that point, Joy, I agree in the need to keep your fiscal house in order, but I also am a little bit concerned about impact to ratepayers. And I've done some look at some of the demographics in the city, and unfortunately the city's low moderate income percentage of households is ever increasing. And I think that if you're on fixed incomes in this environment, it's harder. And I think that 2020 and 2021 are going to be more difficult years because of what's happened with the economy. And so if we have some ability to, A, protect the city's position from a cash flow perspective and give some relief by adjusting the rate increases, and I think that flexibility is on the sewer side, can we look at that? Just trying to look at what our options might be.
Yes, Mr. Jean.
But we do have to get the loan, we have to pass something, so.
Right.
Okay.
I understand that we've got a target that we have to reach in 3 years.
And maybe, again, to help other commissioners, we're very fortunate that we were probably extremely frugal, and our rates are, but it's still going to be a change, significant change. I'm not going to disagree, but at least we have some latitude there in relation to our sister communities throughout the state of Wisconsin. So we're blessed there, but we have to do the tough thing, too.
Is there more discussion? Mr. Corso.
I think John makes a good point. This is going to be a tough year for people. We got a lot of folks out of work. We got a lot of people on fixed incomes, and they could be earning even less than they're earning now or earning nothing. I don't know that it would make sense for us to adjust that first year increment down. It would mean we'd have to adjust the others up because we've got to hit 63% one way or the other. So that's one comment. The other one is, and I handed out a sheet that the Water Conservation Subcommittee had worked on. And of course, our intent here is to give low-income and seniors an opportunity to at least have some control over their water usage. But, if that is really successful, it could mean a reduction in utilization. And what the revenue impact of that would be, I don't know. But you are opening up that issue by undertaking a water conservation program, which is what we recommend.
Yeah, I think the discussions, in the past few months through the commission with regards to looking at how the usage is versus the revenue coming into the utility, and what Brian had talked about with us, staff anyway, as far as looking at our rate structure. When we talk about that, the PSC has their set rate structures and that recommended that you can follow and do those types of things. Larger communities, my discussions with Brian were that, that have 20,000 or more, connections, typically they'll look at doing their own rate structure. And I think that that's to the point where the city is at, to take into account the low-income households and trying to address some of these issues. And so I think in 2021, not only will we go in for a full rate case, but I think we should look at, be my recommendation, as Brian had said, to look at restructuring how we charge with the lifeline and maybe some other things that we can do. I think the other thing that from my standpoint that we need to look at once going into 22, maybe into 23, would be monthly billing. I mean, a quarterly bill is significant. And so if we transition with these rate cases or rates into a monthly billing, I think it's more tolerable for the households as well. And it will be significant on our end to do that, but I think it's for the users. I think it's something that we should focus on moving into and into the future. So and that also would be looked at in the conventional rate case starting in 21 and brought to the commission for a decision on that as well.
Mr. Jean.
I like that approach. We've talked about it, and I think we've partly, it costs money to do the monthly, but at the same time, it makes a lot of sense. And I'm not sure where we are with our billing program. We may have to, so we'll need some time to fix that too, or modify that, or do we have the capability? I can't remember.
Well, we do have the capability, I think, but I think that 2 years gives us the opportunity to move into it. And hopefully, I mentioned this to the billing because it is going to be significant on their end. We just did an upgrade to our software. And we are, with our remote reading of the meters and stuff, we're getting there at almost 100% with the changeover and stuff. So we're still in progress on that. But, and the ability to online and stuff is, might be able to.
The finance director like to chime in.
I was just going to make a couple of comments. We do have people who pay monthly now. They just take what their average bill is per quarter and just submit a payment to us monthly. So we're not prohibiting people from paying monthly. And we have quite a few people that do that. And the other thing between, it looks like a 18% increase versus a 20% increase sounds like a lot, but it's really only a few dollars per quarter. So, I'm not minimizing somebody who is struggling to pay bills, but it's not as if it's going to save them, a significant amount of money on an annual basis. It's not going, but I think it makes the difference, as Brian indicated, for cash flow purposes, to meet some of our other capital needs, because we do, need to remain committed to our other infrastructure that we implement the rate increases. And, we do have an obligation to make a rate of return to our bondholders. And so if we minimize at the beginning and create some problems, that's something that we'd have to respond to relatively quickly and, could create problems for us on future bonding. So that would be.
Is there any more discussion? Mr. Dean?
Can I make a motion to adopt and send to the city council the draft ordinance, understanding there may be some dollar amount changes in it, slight dollar amount changes, if I remember what you said, Eric. So I'm not sure that's a complete motion, but hopefully we should advance that and take that to council. But I like the fact, what Eric brought up was, and Mary Ann actually brought up the fact that they can pay monthly now and that we may move towards billing on a monthly basis. I think that would make that a lot softer and easier for people to budget.
So we have a motion to advance the current draft to the city council. Is there a second? A second by Herbst. Is there more discussion? Mr. Robinson?
I'm still a little bit uncomfortable about the rates, and, year two on the water side is a 3%. So what happens if we adjust, let's say 15% the first year for the sewer, catch that up in the second year, so that at the end of the period, we haven't jeopardized our cash flow? Is that doable?
Yeah, I think that would be up to the commission if you want to soften the first year, increase, a little bit heavier increase in '21, and however you want to forward this on to the city council with your recommendation.
Well, my thoughts are is that people look at their bill in its entirety. They don't break down sewer
Correct,
and water.
that is right. Yep.
And so if we can soften the blow year one and, even it out over, even the rate increases out over the 3 years, I think that would be better. So I would move to amend Joe's motion to have a 15% increase in the first year, a corresponding adjustment, whatever that percentage would be, to get us to that 81% in year three. So you'll have to, well, it wouldn't be, or 63%, I'm sorry. But to get whatever, so it'd be 15%, a number to be determined for year two, and then the 18% in year three. So I would move to amend.
All right, we have an amendment. Do I have a second?
I'll second that, but John, I have a question. Are you talking water or wastewater here? Because
Sewer.
the big discrepancy is on the water side, where we're asking for a 26% rate increase in the first step and only a 3% thereafter. Are you combining the two?
I am adjusting this, my understanding is that we've got more flexibility with the sewer
Yeah,
rate
we can, yes.
Yeah.
than we do with the water rate.
Okay.
Therefore, I'm looking at the sewer rate where there's the flexibility, Jim, in trying.
That was just a clarification. Yeah, I would second your motion.
Is there any discussion on the amendment, Mr. Jean?
I just want to make sure you're talking the right numbers. The number proposed in the first year, which would be this year, was 22%. Did you
Taking
use
that to
it?
15%.
Then we'd have to go minimally, maybe 7, the next would be a 29%, just so as you know
You
that.
have to go higher than 29%, but on average, then your your net increase would be evened over the 3 years. Yes, I understand that the second year is a bigger increase, and it would be more than 7%.
I would be more inclined to support that if it was, instead of going to 15, going to, say, 17. I would prefer that, but we have to vote on this amendment.
Is there more discussion on this amendment?
Yeah. So do I read this correctly, that in phase one, a 20% increase is 20% over what I'm currently paying? In phase two, a 29% increase would be 29 over what I'm currently paying or what I'm paying after the 20%. So that second year, John, does represent a big increase.
Correct.
Just for clarification, the sewer rate adjustments are for this year 22%, next year 22%, and then a final 19%,
Correct.
according to this chart.
Right. And we have to get to a total of
63.
63%, at substantial completion of the project. Brian, correct me if I'm wrong.
That's why I prefer to modify it. I'm okay with it, but I better not go quite down to 15. That's 7% drop.
You could amend the amendment. That is an option.
Well, I'll amend that instead of going to 15, I'll almost split the difference at 18, and then we'll do whatever we have to do the following, well, we'll have to state that for the ordinance. So it'll have to be a corresponding increase, whatever that is, if it's not simple math. So I'm making a motion to amend the amendment, and
To make it easier, I'll withdraw the motion.
Oh, okay, I guess we're, as long as it's okay with the second? Yep, okay. So are we making a new
well,
amendment?
I'll then amend it for the first year, that it'd be 18, and if it's not simple math, it'd be 26 the next year, and then close out at 19, unless you want to spread a little bit between the last 2 years.
So we're looking at 18%?
18, I'll go with that.
26%, and then the 19%.
I'll second.
You have a second by Robinson. Is there any more discussion on this? Looks like, no. Okay. So we're voting on the amendment, amending the ordinance to go from 18% to 26% to 19% on the rate. Yes.
I have a question. If I'm adding correctly, I'm coming up with 65. If we're looking at 18% in 20 and 28 in the second step, 19,
26 in the second step.
26, he dropped it to 26, okay. That'll make a difference.
Okay.
Thank you.
Are you ready to vote? Do you want to discuss? Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes unanimously. All right, now we're on to the amended ordinance. Is there further discussion? Okay. All those in favor of voting in the rate increase ordinance as amended can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. All right. Back to my agenda here. Oh,
As a follow-up to Joe's request, could we have at a time certain an update on that issue of going to monthly billing and perhaps automatic payments and others at some point in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll get something on the agenda for the next couple of months so we can give an update. Okay.
Okay, good. All right, so I'm moving, thank you very much, Brian, for your presentation and helping us through this. We're moving on back to item 3, discussion and possible action on approval of the financial assistance agreement for the Wisconsin DNR Clean Water Fund loan for the wastewater treatment facility upgrade.
Yeah. So, I mean, if anybody has any questions on these, there was the actual financial assistance agreements, which are lengthy. DNR completed those just this week, so I had passed those along. But based on the information that we had in discussions with Donahue, DNR, those loan amounts I tried to break out in the spreadsheet for you, so you can kind of see where those costs are coming from. What our principal forgiveness is, what the engineering professional services are versus the actual construction, and versus what the utility commission is proposing to agree to in the city, with the total dollar amount, and the mandated contingency amount that the DNR requires us to add on to that loan amount. Brian referenced this a little bit, if those contingencies aren't spent, that isn't something we'll borrow, but they require that to be in there.
Sir, Mr. Jean.
This is the document that you forwarded to us very recently.
Yes.
So this is technically what we're approving, is
That
that
is
correct?
correct, yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And those will be finalized through our bond council with resolutions for next week's city council meeting. So bond council has not completed their review and resolution yet.
Not that I read this entirety,
Yeah.
but I did notice, and I think we talked about it, and I think Brian mentioned it, that the interest rate did creep up by 1%, not 8%, but over what I think I remember as being 1.65.
Correct, yeah. When we were giving presentations over the course of the last 2.5 years, we were looking at a 1.65%, and that's what we were basing the rate increases on. When COVID hit, there was a rate increase that was given, so now we are at 1.76% for the water and 1.87 for the wastewater. And so those did creep up. They haven't made any other adjustments since then. So it's unfortunate, but it did creep up for where it was going, so.
Well, it's still a tremendous saving over if we were going out on the open market. The other thing that, and it got clarified today, and I found it myself, but the schedule for payment, all we were paying was interest on the debt, and I couldn't find the principal, but I understand that the principal won't be started until the year 3 of the 20-year life of it, so.
Oh.
I would move, I'll move to adopt this document so that we can proceed with the financing from the state.
All right, I have a motion to approve the financial assistance agreement. Do I have a second?
I will second that.
Herbst, everyone wants to second. Is there any more discussion?
Eric, on the interest rate, that's locked, right, for the duration of the loan?
It is.
That
It's
can't-
a
that can't
fixed
change.
rate. Yep. I think the next adjustment, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, I think is July 1. It's on a quarterly basis.
Actually announce those rates usually the last week, the second last week of June.
Okay.
It'll be right around the loan closing of when like the next quarter's rates come out, and they're good for a quarter. So right now, you're on the second quarter, if you will, of DNR interest rates, and you're locked in.
Okay.
Is there any more discussion? All right, all those in favor of approving the financial assistance agreement can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously, thank you. Moving on to item number 4, discussion and possible action on approving of the financial assistance agreement for the Safe Drinking Water Fund loan for the drinking water treatment facility. I would entertain a motion. Motion by Robinson. Second by Force. Is there any discussion on this?
be occupied. What's the motion?
The motion is to approve the financial assistance agreement for the drinking water, for the treatment facility, right?
With the clean water?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Is there any discussion? All right, I think we're ready to vote. All those in favor can signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes unanimously. All right, we're moving on to item 6, discussion on establishing mandatory private side lead lateral replacement ordinance.
So as we discussed previously about lead service line ordinance, Scott had compiled a few examples of ordinance to make it mandatory. They're all mandatory, right, Scott?
The examples were all mandatory.
Yes, yep. So these are some examples. This is really for a discussion item, unless, of course, the commission feels like they want us to move forward. But, it's an ongoing issue. It comes up every year, sometimes multiple times a year at the commission, as far as the lead we have in the ground, the lead the private residents have in the ground with their services, and how we are going to remediate and remove that from our system. So the DNR has put out some funding to help us through forgivable loan, basically grants. They're slowly creeping in with additional requirements on those. I think eventually you're going to have one of these ordinances in order to apply for it. But currently, they're going to have another round of funding for 2021, which we will apply for, to help with residents on the private side remove their lead service lines.
Mr. Force?
I appreciate the collection of this data, but I can't possibly go through all of this and analyze it and figure out what's good, what's bad, what's current, what's appropriate for us. Somebody has to do that, whether it's a subcommittee of this group or whether it's somebody on the city side, just to give us the highlights of what's in these ordinances, and then let us just start shaping our own ordinance, what we like about someone else's ordinance, what we don't think is necessary, et cetera. So
I can appreciate that. I think we're trying to give some information, and I haven't fully gone through them either, Jim, to write information, but I wanted to get it back in front of the commission is more of a emphasis, did you want staff to continue, maybe draft something for you, an explanation of where we got the information, who's doing what, and really where those municipalities are at. I mean, I don't know where these municipalities are at as far as where they started with lead services when they put this in place, let's say it was 17, 18, and where they are now, 2 years later. So if it's something that the commission really wants to kind of take a look at and a direction that they want to go, we'd be happy to summarize this and prepare this in an easier way to disseminate the information. So, but if anybody has any questions or in general on the lead that we have in the ground, we can answer those.
Mr. Robinson?
Do we have an idea of, based on age of the homes, what percentage of the laterals are lead?
Scott, do you have an idea of the city side? and then
City
the
side, we're
private?
estimating probably right around 5,000, give or take. We're trying to improve those records as we go. Private side is probably estimated right around 10,000.
We have a little over 16,000 connections in the city.
Almost 17,000.
Almost 17, thanks.
So as we go forward, I'd like Green Bay's ordinance a little bit better in terms of the prioritization. I think that there was a little bit more there. But I also would encourage us to give, if we're going to do this, there's a 45-day notice requirement for upcoming work for the projects and others, and they have to respond within 30 days. And the response is getting 2 bids and a contract in order. I think that's, if you're dealing with an elderly person, that's impossible to get done. So I would look for us where to maximize the length of time to notification to actually having the application submitted and the bids in place. We have to, I think, be reflective of that they're older homes, probably older owners. You give them a notice, they're gonna spend 3-4 weeks trying to figure out what it means, and then their time's up. So I would encourage us to give some thought as to what's the maximum amount of time that we could give in terms of lead with a lot of your road work and others, you know that well enough in advance. And if we could look at, again, how we might be able to build additional notice into that, I think that would be helpful in getting it done.
That's a good point.
I have Mr. Forrest up here first.
Eric, I just wanted to ask, and Scott, in the past, and John, we've had this discussion many times about lead service lines, but in the past, we've sort of had an ad hoc priority list of if your street's being reconstructed, then you're priority number one, although priority number one probably was daycare centers and schools. So priority number two is if your street's being constructed, you could get your private line done. And then I think at our last meeting, we sort of said, well, if your street had been reconstructed in the last 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, that was sort of priority three. Are we thinking about going beyond that? And again, I haven't read these programs that you've included in the packet, but are we talking about anybody in the city with a lead line can apply for a loan?
That was on the priority. It was one of the last priorities, Jim. We're not there yet.
Okay.
The Water Department, Cheryl and Scott, have been going through, starting with 2016, and going backwards, those construction projects that were done, knowing the private side, sending notices out to those groups. I don't know where we're at, Scott, if you want to.
2013's letters are going to go out this afternoon or tomorrow morning.
Okay, so you're working backwards that way.
We are working backwards. The reason we stayed away from just any application anywhere in the city is because the replacement has to result in a full lead line replacement. So the city side and the homeowner side has to be replaced.
Gotcha.
And typically, the city costs with the road replacement and stuff are anywhere from 4 to 5 times higher than the homeowner's portion. So if it costs them $3,000 to $5,000, it's going to cost us probably $15,000 to $25,000 per service to change out.
Okay. So that's a significant condition.
Correct. So $100,000 of principal forgiveness funding that we give to the private side could end up costing us $500,000.
Thank you.
Mr. Jean?
I was just going to simply clarify that residents know if we're going to do a project for assessment purposes, they do know, and they would just be informed that we've got this ordinance in place, and that'll happen a year before. But I know those dates, and I too need the time to read those, and I didn't get a chance. I just noticed that we had 3 or 4 samples from the Fox Valley.
Okay, so we'll keep this on our list and we'll have some good sample ordinances.
Yeah, so we'll go ahead, Jim, and start weeding through this and bring it back at some point in the near future, okay? For further discussion. Appreciate the feedback.
All right, moving on to item number 7, discussion and possible action on the 2021-2025 draft capital budget.
As most of you know, this is the spreadsheets that we typically go through on an annual basis. This is just a draft to take a look at. We'll be bringing this back in July, hopefully for a final. You know, as we went through with Brian on our capital projects and our borrowing moving forward for the next 4 to 5 years, this is really where we have to kind of focus in. We know that likely we're going to have the borrowing for the treatment facilities, right? And so the other large capital projects we typically have every year is if we reconstruct a street, we replace as necessary the water and sewer underneath. And so those are typically borrowed. And so the more streets that we do or are able to do, and in the past few years has been significant because of the TID funding we've had to do infrastructure, which is been significant for us. It's been a little bit more of a burden on the utility, but the utility has done well financially to, support those projects and get those old services and those old mains out of the ground and replaced. So, these are the priorities, working with Dave on the wastewater side and Scott on the water side. Again, they're drafts, and we can bring the finals back if you have any recommendations. We can work on them over the next couple of weeks and share them with you as well if we make edits to them and make improvements to them, for your consideration as well before the next meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Jean.
When I first looked at that, I said, and I know there's routine things that we do, like lining the sewer to the tune of roughly 400,000, and all the things that we do on the water side to support the projects associated with street reconstruction. I'm kind of hoping we can feather this out so we don't have to have an additional rate increase on both sides. But I'm sure it's going to be inevitable that we're going to have to do that down the line, but we're biting off a whole bunch right now, and I'm hoping that it has to be super essential to go beyond, but we have to do what we have to do too to maintain our infrastructure. So I'm suggesting we all take a good look at it. You're going to have it back in July or August for both.
Got it. Mr. Robinson, then Mr. Forrest.
So Eric, in light of the system upgrade at the wastewater treatment plant, one of the things you've got in there is a dump truck. And my understanding is that the volume of sludge will be significantly reduced. Are there opportunities for us to evaluate that? And I don't know if you evaluated the capital plan in light of the program efficiencies and/or reductions? And can you if you haven't?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what, when we look at the capital budgets over the last, years, I've been here 5 years now, and when I first started, those were ramping up, and over the last couple of years while we were doing the feasibilities, those have actually come down. And so, based on the fact that, the plants, we were doing minimal maintenance on those, assuming we were gonna have the upgrades. And so, yeah, I do agree. I think that some of our operations moving forward, we'll have to take a look at, what their needs are for those. I know right now, a lot of the sludge hauling, we contract it out, or we have streets with their trucks do it. And there will be significantly less biosolids that come out of that new plant. So I think that those things are things that we need to take a closer look at, John. I think we've tried in some ways, but I think we could do a better job, trying to even out this borrowing and these larger budget items that are coming up. Yep.
Eric, I would like to see a breakout of borrowed versus out of the op funds, so that we don't have to go through and, identify each op fund and add it up ourselves. So in addition to the spreadsheet that you have, maybe another column that shows the total op funds, and then another one, the total borrow, would be helpful.
Yeah, we can for sure do that. Yep.
Is there any more discussion? Okay, I guess we'll see this again.
Yes.
Last item on our agenda is number 8, discussion and review of the 2019 PSC annual report for drinking water.
This was completed and submitted to the PSC as we do annually, and typically I brought it forward just for the commissioners' review, and if they had any comments or questions for either Valerie, she prepares it for us, and or what had happened in 2019.
Yeah, Mr. Cheney.
Well, you clarified how we had a jump in net income, but it probably also affected the return on base at that 8.91%, so that answers that. I think I know the answer to, it's shown on page W15, loss. It's not, not revenue lost water, and is that our flushing program and maintaining quality out in the industrial park or wherever? Is that 23%? Or is there more to that?
It is. There was a increase this year from over last year and the prior year. And we just started looking at it, what that increase was. And there may be some of it contributed to the industrial park with the tower that we had to turn over several times with, that line was put out to Great Lakes Cheese there, our new industrial park area. There's also going to be a couple other items that we wanted to review in there, but it's going to be fairly accurate. Valerie puts it together, and I didn't have a good opportunity to go through and see what the differences were.
The lost water was at 7%, unaccounted for lost waters. That's excellent.
Yeah, Mr. Force.
This is a good exercise, having to get up and down. Plus, I'm getting more and more used to speaking to you from this distant podium.
Okay.
Inside joke. The I&I study, where did that come from? I don't recall, unless I missed it, us having an I&I study on our agenda in the past. Is this, John asked about it earlier, and I read it, and I understand that we have an I&I problem. Most older cities do. But where did this come from?
It's actually been our capital budget. We started
Okay.
it in, I think in 18 it was on, and we talked about putting something out last year, and we didn't get to it, so we carried it over
Okay.
for 2020. And, you know, the main reason is some of the significant rain events that we've had. You know, the plant is seeing over 21 million gallons a day and so it's 4 or 5 times our average daily flow. So I think we don't really have a comprehensive I&I study
Okay.
citywide, so I thought
Okay.
it would be good to at least narrow down.
Well, it
some.
makes sense. I mean, I'm not a weather predictor, but I think we're going to see more rainfall in the future.
Sure.
I think that's, the other thing was this little sheet that I passed out on water conservation. If you want Scott and Steve and I to continue with that, I don't know if you had a chance to take a look at it, but it was just a very simple couple of recommendations that we wanted the commission to look at and let us know whether we should keep going or do something else.
Thank you.
Okay. And basically, we felt that we should try to concentrate on some simple, straightforward messages, maybe one at a time, rather than a whole list of things, and that we should also be creative in our approach to getting the word out. It's not just the city newsletter. There are a number of other ways that we could publicize these water conservation ideas. And so we would, I guess, if you're in favor of us doing that, we would sort of come up with some next steps.
Mr. Robinson.
Jim, I applaud you for your efforts. One of the things that I would encourage you to look at is rain barrels as a way of both collecting stormwater and of reducing water use for gardening.
one at our home? Yes.
So, but if we could build that into the system, I know some utilities such as Superior and others provided rain barrels. I don't know if there was a minimal cost, but that may be something to evaluate.
I wonder if the county would help us. They provided some compost bins and things like that at a reduced cost. Just a thought.
All thoughts count.
Cool. All right, before we adjourn, I did not introduce our new commissioner, John Robinson, at the beginning, but I just want to make sure everybody knows who he is. If you don't know who he is, I'm surprised. But thank you so much for agreeing to join us on our commission. I don't know if you want to say a couple of words.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back. Joe and I had a stint together 28 years ago.
Some time ago.
So it's good to be back, and I look forward to working with you all.
Thank you. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn. Or I'm just going to adjourn. Good, thank you.